Okay, David, so it occurred to me that in our part 1 video that I titled Anatomy of a Pin Tumbler Cylinder, we really didn't I didn't show you the actual complete anatomy of it. So someone looking at the video might say, okay, I still don't understand it. Aren't there more parts? Well, there are more parts. So what I have here is a rim cylinder. The rim cylinders are used when you're going to install types of hardware such as chimney-proof locks, or they can be used as a cylinder for the exterior of an exit device. It's hardware. When hardware requires a generic type of cylinder construction, a rim cylinder very often will meet that requirement. The parts that come in here, this is not a video on rim cylinders. It's just a video on what's in a pin tumbler cylinder. So I'm going to disassemble this, and this is going to be something that you're going to learn how to do in the course of these videos. Exactly what needs to be done to repin or recombinate or change the code, set the pins, however people say it. But basically you've got these keys here, and as we discussed last time, the cuts on the key are related to the pin tumblers. The way that the key is modified from it being blank is directly related to whether or not it will work. So if you had this cylinder and you need to make keys work that had a different code than this key, you would change the pin tumblers by basically rearranging them to the proper lengths and in the proper chambers. Okay, so we've discussed that. So I'm going to take this apart just so I can show you everything else that's inside of here. And it's because I would teach you how to do this in the course of teaching you how to rekey cylinders. But because I called that video Anatomy of a Pin Tumbler Cylinder, I better show you the anatomy of it. So disassembling it right now is not important for me to explain. I'm just going to take it apart. What these parts are, how you take them apart, is not important right now. So this part we did when we took apart that, which was a rim cylinder actually. It was a rim cylinder that we did in the last video. So this cylinder happens to have 6 chambers drilled in it. There are 6 holes there. It's called drilled 6, pinned 5. It's pinned to a 5-pin key. You could also take this same key, which is stamped RA, which is a Sargent keyway. That would be longer. It would be a 6-pin length. You could stick that in there, and then you could add a 6th pin here. But this is drilled 6, pinned 5. It's actually inferred in the part number. The 7075 means literally drilled 6, pinned 5. Doesn't matter. If it was a 7076, it would be drilled 6, pinned 6. Doesn't matter. So we're going to leave this because we've already talked about the plug, the pins. You know, you could understand that the length of the pin tumbler on the first cut is going to be longer than the second cut. Okay, we've discussed that. So we'll put that aside. Now, I had talked about what's left in here as being the Bible, this area up in here. But I didn't show you what is up in here. So what is up in here are springs and driver pins or top pins. There are different, and we don't say pin tumblers. You can just abbreviate it to pins. So there are bottom pins, there are master pins, there are control pins, there are top pins or driver pins. Sometimes they're in Corbin Russwin. They can be called build-up pins. Basically, all of the pins that you have in your kit, the ones that are bottom pins, will always have a shape that will be some sort of a V at the bottom.
Okay.
Regardless of the system, they all will kind of look like a V, but if you put it under a high-powered microscope, you'd be able to say, the shape of that V is different than the shape of that V from one manufacturer to the next, and it has everything to do with how that cut is. You'll notice on this key, it has a much wider area at the bottom where it's flat. It's different than another key that you'd get that would not have such a wide little area here.
Okay.
That matters. That matters. That is part of the DNA of this system. If you're cutting a key for this Sargent system, and you've got the wrong cutter in it, meaning it's not going to leave you the proper flat or plateau area at the root of the cut, the pin ain't going to seat proper. The pin tumbler, the bottom pin tumbler will not seat properly into the key when you insert it in the plug, and it will definitely prevent you from having a condition of shear. So it's all really important. There is a document on file that will tell you all the dimensional properties of that cut, and it's called the depth and spacing chart. So this tool is called a plug follower. I have this plug follower installed in the housing because I've got springs and top pins in here. All of the other pins that aren't bottom pins will all have the same shape, but they will be different lengths. So whether it be a master or a build-up or a control or a driver top pin, they will look like the pin tumbler, except they won't have the V at the bottom. The profile at the top is the profile at the bottom. So there are, because it's pinned 5, there are 5 springs in here. Below those 5 springs are 5 top pins or driver pins. You can call them driver or top pins, doesn't matter. So the plug follower is in there because it's keeping those pins being pushed down by the springs in place. If I pull that out, they're all going to pop out. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to carefully, slowly pull it out because I don't want to lose the parts. So what just happened is all of those springs just came out of where they belong. They're all laying in there now. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to dump all those out. So I should have 5 springs and 5 top pins or driver pins. And indeed I do. So now we have the anatomy. So we've got the housing. It's got the holes drilled up in the top. And you can also access it if you peeled away this piece of brass. You don't want to do that unless you have another piece of brass to go in there, because it's been put in place and then crimped. It's been staked into place. When the factory makes these, they don't pin them the way that you and I pin them by removing the plugs. They put the plug in the housing and then they load it. They top load it. 5 bottom pins go in, 5 driver pins go in, 5 springs go in. Then the brass comes in and the machine comes down and stakes it. Staking it just is those little arrowhead shapes there that deform the brass, so that piece that's just a thin piece of brass. I could get a tool underneath here and literally peel it off. It's just thin brass. And that's what holds all that in place. So the anatomy of a pin tumbler is that you have springs and you have driver pins, and in a cylinder that has only one code operating it, you'll only have bottom pins. As we touched on last week, as you kind of discovered, if you wanted 2 different keys to work in the cylinder, you're going to have to add more pins because you're going to need to create an additional shear line. We're going to get to all of that later on when we get to physically keying and then master keying. So you've got springs, and I'm just going to put it back in there, and then you've got driver pins. The driver pins are what push on the bottom pins. And now in your mind's eye, as I pull that key out and that back in, and you can see how the pins dance. They move up and down. What keeps them biased or with tension on them is the fact that there's a spring pushing another pin down on it. So when you put a key in and out, you'll feel a little bit of resistance when you push it in and push it out. Right now, there's no resistance on that. But the next time you insert a key, you'll hear a click, 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 if you really listen. And what's happening is those little springs are pushing those pins down. Because if I didn't have the springs and the top pins, nothing would keep that in place. Meaning, there are, like lever locks, they sit on their sides. If there were no springs, if that was laid on its side, or even worse in European locks where they're upside down, those bottom pins would not stay in place to create a shear line that's here. So that's why you've got to have springs and top pins, because they push those pins down, and only when the bottom pins are the right length will you then have a shear line. So at some point in the future, when you do get into pinning locks, you're going to end up with springs and top pins in your lap, and you did not intend for them to come out. This part of the video will just show you how to put them back. You'll need tweezers. Well, there's a tool for doing it that I think you still need tweezers. And Anna uses the term bomb, when you bomb a cylinder, I'll grab my tweezers. Now, locksmithing tweezers, they have a little concave feature to them. These tweezers are older than Terry. They have a little concave feature to them at the tip so that they go around a round object better. Tweezers that you have at home are not good for this because they don't have that concave. And that's why these tweezers are $1 million. When I reload the springs, I go to the center of it and I work my way towards the front on one side. Now there are 6 holes. How do I know which 5 of the 6? Well, I'm starting at the front. The 6th one in the back is the empty one. That's the back of the cylinder. Yeah. So I go halfway because it's really hard to stick your tweezers all the way in there and get to the back. It's not hard to stick the tool in there, but your eyes won't be able to judge that distance very well because it's such a confined space. So I've put my springs back in there. The 6th hole is empty. That 6th chamber is empty. Now I need to put the pins back in there, the driver pins. For me, when I do this, this is the front of the cylinder plug. You don't have to memorize this because you will get this in depth. This is the front of the cylinder plug, not this end. So if I want to get that in there, I'm going to push it through the back so that I know what is the front. Now, with this type of cylinder, I know what the front of the cylinder looks like because it looks specific. It's this. There are cylinders that you cannot tell what is the front and what is the back of the cylinder. You can't tell. They look the same from either side. Except that if you take the plug and stick it in the back, it'll go in, but the key won't come out because the center to center where those holes, the chambers are drilled, is not exactly the same referenced from the front as it is the back. So you always have a standard reference point. Make this the front of your cylinder because then you'll always know when you put it down what is the front. Or my cousin, he didn't do it that way. He would take a black marker because you could mark the face of the cylinder because you wouldn't see it with a little line. He'll know what the front of it is. Whatever. To each his own. So now I've got the plug follower in there because I'm going to need the plug follower in there. I'm going to back that off to the 3rd hole. Yeah. I'm going to take one of my pin tumblers. I'm going to grab it towards the top so that I can stick it in there and push it down. Now with my index finger here, I'm going to push the plug follower in. Now I'm holding it because I'm pushing it this way. I'm going to take the tweezers, I'm going to push that pin down, and voila, I go to the next hole.
And then with them being top or driver pins, there's no
points
between the top or bottom.
Exactly. You can put them in. They are symmetrical from either end. Doing this, we're putting it back together just because we're here, because I needed to show it to you. But actually doing this successfully. Now, if I pulled it out further, I got 3 holes there and I got 2 pins. That's normal. If I pulled it out further, it's going to shoot out.
Come out.
And it'll shoot out, meaning it could hit your eyes. It ain't going to kill you, but you're like, oh man, that just hit me in the eye.
Injury.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know of people that wear eye protection when they key locks, but there is an advantage to needing cheaters because it could make contact. The real hazard is losing the parts. Now, if I lost these parts, it's not the end of the world because I have more of these. But if you're working on a system that has special parts, like if I lost this spring from the back of the cylinder, I don't have any of those. Without that spring, this thing ain't going to work. So when you end up getting to the point where you're keying locks, you need to be mindful. Don't lose anything. I've had stuff hit the floor, and I've been down there for 15 minutes finding it because the guy's waiting. And I don't have any more of those. So, old customer of mine, he said he's a locksmith. That's all he does all day. He will take a piece of cloth on his desk and he'll lay it onto his lap. Okay. He says, you can't have no idea how many times that saved me. So all I'm doing now is I'm putting this back together. How I'm doing it, why I'm doing it, doesn't matter. I always, in order to get the key out, I subconsciously always test it so I know that it works. Because you don't want to put something back together and then it goes on the shelf and then it goes to the customer. He's like, this doesn't work. So you always check your work. It's not like computer programmers. If we have a computer programmer help us with something, okay, I'm done. Did you check your work? No. Well, it doesn't work. Always check your work. The litmus test that I give for putting things, for keying stuff or working on stuff for customers, and it will sound crazy, but it's only because it's actually happened in my life with customers of mine. I pin the cylinder together such that if the customer comes home drunk, it works so smoothly, because you know what happens when a key doesn't work. If a key doesn't work and you're drunk, guess what's going to happen? The door is going to get kicked in. Oh yeah, key cylinder? So in my litmus test is I rebuild it or I rekey it to that level that it works so flawlessly that there's no substandard residual failure of operation. It's going to work perfectly. And if it doesn't, I make it so. And it's because customer called me up, Jim Ganley called me up and says, yeah, man, I need a new lock. What happened? Over on Mozart, 1033 Mozart, or whatever the job was. And he says, yeah, my guy came home and he was drunk, his key didn't work, and he kicked the door in. So it wasn't my fault that the key didn't work. And it's because the drunk guy was at the wrong apartment. So his key shouldn't work. He kicks the door in. Lady is at home in her apartment. She's sitting on her couch. She's a Chicago police officer. She jumps up. What the hell's going on? She realizes it's the neighbor. And he walks in like, where? This isn't my apartment. And she could tell that it wasn't someone breaking in, except that the guy did break in. So the point of the matter is when you touch something that is like this, it must work not only physically correct, but it must work scientifically correct, meaning you are doing it to the best established standards. If you were to supply, and this, now we're on a tangent, but this will only go for a minute. If you were to supply material that, imagine in that case where the drunk guy came home and his key actually worked the lock, unintentionally. It's a mistake. There is going to be this has happened. Guy has a key that shouldn't work, it goes in, there's a murder, there's a rape. You can guarantee someone is going to be sued at a minimum. You can guarantee those lawyers are going to find out who pinned those locks. You can guarantee that. That is not a good look. No. It's never happened to me.
No, but that's true. Sounds like just randomly test each lock until something gives a little bit.
Well, you have to make sure that your work is correct. And it's also an understanding long-term of what is considered best practices. And that is a term that can only, best practices is the most absolute correct way as defined by the national organizations that have an expert level of command over the subject matter have defined as these are best practices. So if in a fictional case where a locksmith gets served with a warrant to come to court, he's going to have to say, this is what I did, this is why I did it, this is how the industry has taught us to do it, and in fact this is the proper way to do it, so that the person who's got the problem doesn't use you as the reason that they have the problem in the first place. So learning what the best practices are a lifelong journey that you go on. And it starts with someone just showing you how to bomb a cylinder. Okay, there's your tweezers, put it back together. Here's your tweezers and plug follower, all the way up to incredibly advanced levels of understanding. Now, if you were to go on YouTube, and this year I posted maybe 32 videos from a class that I took last year, and let's just find it. Yeah, it's called Locksmithing for the Locksmithing for the Locksmithing for the door. If you were to search that for the door, there are 32 videos. I was right. So I produced 32 chapters. And there's also a written article on this. It's probably 85 pages long, where I go through. It's basically summarizing a class that I took on becoming an advanced master keying specialist, is the technical AMKS behind my name. That class was taught by Lloyd Selber, who worked for Schlage. He's an independent consultant. And Ralph Forrest Ball, who is a master keying maestro in his own right. These are guys that are teachers in the national organization. And I basically, in that class, is intended for locksmiths, people who run the keying department. Think of a Big Ten college. Name one: Ohio, Nebraska, Iowa. I mean, it's not the SEC; it's Big Ten, right? Doesn't matter. Let's just say, Gainesville, University of Florida. How many doors do you think there might be in all the dorm rooms there? How many cylinders? The answer is thousands.
Yeah.
Okay. So the guys that are managing that system on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, they take classes like this, and other people that run hospitals.
Okay.
So I took that class, and I then summarized it for people in our industry, people that don't make a living as a locksmith. But the important stuff that you as a hardware distributor should, in my opinion, should know. So if you ever wanted to dive super deep into best practices, that stuff would be a way to go at some point in the whenever. So I just wanted to make you aware of that those kind of exist. So that's the anatomy of a pin tumbler cylinder. When I return, I'm going to show you the lever tumbler cylinder, the lever tumbler lock, which I have one behind here, but we're already at a half an hour. Just to show you lever tumblers, just to put it in context of what that is, and then I'll probably show you a wafer tumbler, just so that you have that in your head as well. What questions do you have on the anatomy of a cylinder?
This is just a rim cylinder.
That's a rim cylinder, yeah.
Rim cylinder, heavy housing. We do have the plug containing the pins. We have the tail, and I know we have the C-clip. That's a little going into that more into detail.
The C-clips, threaded caps, which that one have, however you hold the cam or tailpiece on, doesn't matter. There's always some way that it's done. It could be a C-clip, like the one we had last week. This one was a threaded cap.
I saw that.
Doesn't matter how you hold the tailpiece on, but there will be a way. And as you encounter the stuff in the future, you'll say, I've never seen that before. Well, how the heck does it work? Just figure it out. And you'll just figure it out. And if you can't, you'll ask someone who knows. That's how locksmithing is learned.
Different lengths for them. I know that bottom pins always have the arrow at the bottom.
Some sort of a pointed shape, yeah.
Everything else in between?
Almost all. There are instances when there aren't. Like, there might be a pin that has a teat on the bottom. Kaba Gemini will be different. It might be balls. Actually, Gemini could be a ball shape, like a round shape. So
can you have ball pins? They don't operate as smoothly as, say, those kind of shape.
I would say that ball ends would operate smoother. And in fact, 100+ years ago, they were putting ball bearings under the bottom pins, so that the key would go in and out much easier. They were literally putting small ball bearings that had a specific height that equaled a specific cut height. It was always like a 2, I think. But those are not used anymore, even though they can be used. But it's not necessary to use them anymore. The reason they were used is because, I think I had mentioned it, they were using disparate hardness of metals. The pin tumblers and the keys were different hardnesses, so the key would get worn because it's going in and out so many thousands of times a week. So ball bearings were used because they would literally reduce that wear and tear.
Okay. Changing pins, repinning, rekeying. We'll get into more detail afterwards. Spacing as well, that I didn't know. Spacing as well as the cuts on the key matter. And that's just a different... Sergeant uses that larger, wider cut at the bottom.
It's different than the other one.
Could be different size or lengths.
Everything. So the bottom line is, regardless of whose environment you're working in, medical, Schlag, Quickset, Sergeant, you have to be aware of what you're dealing with. Their systems, because the tools that you will use will be different, possibly. The pins will be different because they'll be shaped differently. That kit that we have there is a generic kit. It'll work, but it's not the right way to do it. The right way pin Sargent is to use a Sargent pin kit, because those pins are made the way they engineered it. In addition to that, when you're duplicating keys, as I had said earlier, if you're not leaving the right plateau on the bottom, your pins won't sit flat, because the pin will be slightly resting on the side of the cut a little bit.
There won't be a shear, so that way it won't give you that.
You know, you got cuts on a key, 3, 7, 8, 2, 4, and you use those pins and they don't sit flush. What's wrong here? Well, what's wrong here is you duplicated that key on the wrong cutter or the wrong punch, and it's not formed the cut in the blade of the key correctly. But that's okay, because over time, as you become experienced working within a manufacturer's system, you learn all of those particulars. You learn what the depths of the cuts are, and what the plateau is, and what cutter to use, what machine to use, what blank to use. The important part right now is that you recognize, that you understand, if I'm working on Chevy, I got to use all Chevy tools, because those Chevy tools don't work on a Ford, just to put it in a silly sort of generic way. It's the same with keying. You can kind of get away using generic parts, but I'm sure it would be considered, I know that it's considered not best practice.
And the same thing, you wouldn't work on the lever cylinder as the same as you would for a rim
Absolutely not. And so why are you saying that? Why are you asking that?
Just for when looking at the different material whenever it comes in, or again, if you have a client that's looking for that specific kind of hardware, then it would be, again, technically different, because if you're not going to be working with sledge as you're going to be working with Sargent, you're going to be having to think of the different materials for that specific product instead of the other ones.
If you got a Schlage lever lock, and I just did a job earlier today, a guy wanted 2 high security cylinders for his Schlage AL80s, they're levers. You have to order the right cylinder for that. You can't use a cylinder intended for a Sargent lever lock. It's designed differently. You have to order the right part for the system. So whether it be the specifications of how the key is cut, or the actual cams, cylinders, all of the pins that will be used to combine that material, you work within a cohesive ecosystem.
Okay.
You when you're working in Schlage, you're working in Schlage. You can't use anybody else's parts, because it's just not going to work. Now, there are generic platforms of hardware. This is a rim cylinder. It'll work in any manufacturer's hardware that requires a rim cylinder, because rim cylinders are all the same design. I would use the word composite or generic. They're all generic. I could show you a rim cylinder by 10 different people. They'll all look slightly different, but when you install them, they all work. They all install the same way. It's the same stuff. They all have to have a tailpiece. They all have to have a couple of screws that hold them in. They're all going to be a kind of a certain length. It's all it's generic. But you know, all these manufacturers make their own rim cylinders. There's no doubt. I just happen to pull a couple of
apartment complex. Same thing with my door for the door handle.
Describe that handle. What is it? Knob or lever?
It's a lever.
Okay, so it's got a key that goes in the lever?
Key goes into the lever, and then that unlocks. What's
the name on the key? Is there one? Doesn't matter, no. But okay. So we talked about in our first video.
Did have markings on it that I did notice when I looked at my own key.
So we're going back to key identification. So, you know, is there a name? No. Are there any markings? Yes. Does that help you? What about the bow shape? Does that tell me anything? Yes. What about the cuts on the key? Can I decipher whose system it is by knowing the cut spacings and the depths from one to the other? You can, because if you looked at the depth and spacing data, you can say, oh, only Kwikset uses this spacing from the center of one cut to the center of the other cut.
Does one company stick to one key code, or they, of course, use different key codes for their own different locks?
You mean the cuts on the key?
Cuts on the key.
So cuts on the key are just almost always numbers, like 0 to 10 or 1 to 6, or just small numbers. Sometimes they're letters, but they're almost always numbers. So Schlage will use a 2, Kwikset will use a 2, Sargent will use a 2, because it's just the number 2. But if you measured each of their, I'm doing this to mean my caliper, If I took a Quickset 2 and I measured it, and I took a Sargent 2 and I measured it, and I measured the length of the Schlage, they're all 2s, but they're all different.
Oh, okay.
And then if I measured the diameter of each, they're all going to be different. It may be inconsequentially different, but they will be different. Well, they may not be. They'll be so tiny different that you could use them interchangeably, but those lengths are going to be different.
Okay.
So a 2x Schlage is not the same physical length as if I took my tape measure, except I'll use a caliper. It's different. Sargent may not have a 0. I think it does. Some Corbin has a 10. Schlage doesn't have a 10. There's no 10.
Yeah.
Quickset has a 7, but nobody knows about it. So, what else you got?
Nothing really else. And again, we already discussed how you wouldn't put this on a high security door because again, it's just a regular generic cylinder. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, what I like to say in that regard is part of being good at what you do is understanding that you're the expert and that you every day try to become more expert, and that your client is coming to you because they're not the expert. Client might say, oh, this is what I need. And if the situation calls for it, you'll take the information that the client has given you. Yeah, I need another rim cylinder because somebody broke another key in my cylinder. Okay, so that tells me that there's vandalism. That tells me that, maybe you've got something that people shouldn't stick other things into. Maybe, why did that happen? Maybe you need to talk to them about a cylinder system that has a stronger key. Or, yeah, I need this rekeyed because my girlfriend's son's best friend actually copied the key, came into the house and took her money, whatever the situation is. You might say, that's awful. Would you like to talk about a key system where the keys cannot be duplicated without your permission? So the expert makes his client aware of that. Remember, the expert, you in this case, you're an advocate of the owner. You work for the owner. So you're obligated to do what's best for the owner. You're also obligated, in my opinion, to make sure that they understand what the owner wants is not the best way to do that. And if you don't want my advice, I'm sorry, but you came to me as the expert. Take it or leave it. But I feel obligated to let you know. I also feel obligated to try to make more sales for my business and do so that a way that advocates better on the client's behalf. Your keys are getting copied and someone's coming into your laundry facility to the 3-flat and breaking open the machine and stealing all the quarters because they're copying the key too easy. You tell me. You want to spend $150 on a cylinder that will stop that problem, or you want to keep losing your quarters?
Alter a different alternate.
Absolutely. You stay right there. I want to just, for the final 2 minutes, I'm going to show you a key. Sorry, I got to find one. It's in here somewhere. I think. Oh yeah, sorry. Look around. Well, this key is blank, but it doesn't matter. So this cylinder, that's a rim cylinder. Okay, you now know what a rim cylinder looks like 3 different ways. Same concept, right? There's a tailpiece. How you hold it on, you will get there by a different way. You're looking at this and you're saying, well, there's a couple of screws, so I'm going to go with a couple of screws need to be removed. Okay, so the point is that's a funny looking bow. Never seen one of those before. That's a high security bow from Russwin. It says Russwin on it. Look at those notches down in the bottom. You ever seen one like that? No. Very, very unusual. There may not even be any pin. Oh, there's no pins in this. You cheaters. The point of the matter is it's not pinned. This is what would be called sub-assembled. Hi, Ann.
This is dead.
Good. Not good.
Not good. What can I do to make it undead, potentially?
Oh, it's going to get hot in here.
Yeah, like it's warm.
Well, is the battery dead? That face panel's got to come off, and I'll put the battery on my multimeter. Just call our contractor for this. Tell them to come down and check it for a battery, because it'll get steamy in here. So this is a blank. There's no cuts here. This is what's called sub-assembled. If someone guy calls up and says, "Yeah, I ordered this deadbolt. There's no keys or pins." I'm like, "Yeah, you ordered it sub-assembled." "I didn't know that." "Well, I'm sorry, but you ordered it sub-assembled." "I don't know what that means." "Well, you do now. That means it doesn't come with keys." So you got to be careful when people are ordering stuff. Okay. Pull the battery out of there.
Where is the battery?
Oh, then it's hardwired. Okay, so it's not a battery problem. So what happens in this high security system, which is, you can't get these anymore. These guys got sued and they lost the case, and I have these because they're, they're for my,
Sorry to interrupt.
in the back wall. But if you just hold on a second,
Yeah.
we'll get to it. What happens now? Remember your bottom pins and your top pins.
Yeah.
In this system, those pins have a T-slot cut in top so that they literally lock in place. So all the pins are connected together and then dropped in through the top, which means you have to have these notches in order to be able to spin that key around, because it'll actually go through that T-slot cut. It's impossible.
Oh, I see.
But the point of the matter is, you cannot physically defeat this cylinder in a way that I can physically defeat that cylinder by what's called shimming it open. You can't shim this cylinder open.
No.
This would absolutely be considered high security. Now, the guy who's getting his quarters stolen, he is not going to go. The girlfriend's son's buddy is not going to go to Home Depot or anywhere and get this cut. You want to solve problems, you make it a key that can't be cut. This is a really unusual example. But this was considered high security. Oh, you can see it right here. See how those two pins were locked together?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
That's what it is. Those two pins are locked together. Right there. And that raised area is actually the pin tumbler. It's just not showing you the chisel point on the bottom, the V point on the bottom. And that's how that system works together. So really, really cool.
Interesting, yeah. No, that's really nice.
David, I could, and I will. I can show you a book that's that thick, and every 3 pages is a new genius invention by someone who's taking this technology and making it different, smarter. It's crazy. And this technology's got to be is certainly decades old. I don't know when this was patented. Probably in the 1960s. Would be my guess. The point of it is the anatomy of the pin tumbler system. It's not important to think Schlage, Russwin, Sargent. What's important to understand is the anatomy of a pin tumbler system, a pin tumbler cylinder, will always surrender itself to the rules of that system. Think of playing a card game. The rules in poker are different than the rules in blackjack. They're both card games. But you just have to understand the different rules. You use the same stuff to play either game. You just use a different set of rules.
Okay.
And it's the same for understanding key systems and the anatomy of a pin tumbler. This happens to be basically the easiest that exists.
Oh, okay.
But once you understand the concept of the easiest that exists, it's all variations on that at that point.
Yeah.
So the pins interlock together. I don't care. I understand it now. You explained it. I looked at it. I played with it. I learned myself. I got it. But when you understand the basic technologies, it's all derivatives or variations.
Okay. That's true.
So next time, we're going to resume the book.
Okay.
And get back on track. But now you have a base for terms that will... And if we encounter... Yeah. If we encounter other terms that I'm using that, like, it will help to show me that, we're going to stop and I'm going to show it to you. That's how we're going to continue. We're going to continue this on until it's done.
Okay.
When we get through that book completely, which will be weeks and weeks, it'll be months from now. But as long as we keep doing it like we're doing, we will get to physical, practical exercises. Make this key work. Right now it doesn't work. We've talked about it. Now make it happen.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. Again, thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up. Please subscribe and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you. Thanks to our clients, Architectural Builder Supply is building an additional facility. And what follows is not only a look at the acreage that we're building the facility on, but also first the architectural renderings as they exist, or at least the architectural plans as they exist at this time. Thank you very much. Let's take a look. All right, let's take a look at the architecturals as they exist at this moment, or at least it wouldn't be proper to call these architecturals, but it would be proper to call them renderings in the sense of they're conceptual drawings, they're not renderings. So the entire space is going to look like this in terms of a site rendering. This will be a 22,000 square foot building, of which we'll have specific purpose areas. There'll be a workshop down here. This is a few thousand square feet that will be likely woodworking, metalworking, CNC, things of that nature. This will be an office area here, a private office area. This will be Architectural Builders Supply expanded storage area where we will be able to do fulfillment. The entire space in the center is going to be all of the volume, as I call it. Large components will be able to be stored in stock there. Machinery that's too large to fit otherwise may be put out here. Specific facility rooms, and then some recreation over here. Let's take a look at that drone footage, and thank you very much for taking a look.